Hi, I'm MJ from Linus Publications, and this afternoon we're going to take a look at the main primary for the Senate seat that is currently held by Susan Collins. And the primary we're going to look at is for the Democrats. And we have Janet Mills, which is now the governor of Maine. And we have someone called Graham Platner, which is a relatively newcomer that is coming up. And he's a former Marine veteran, and he is currently working in the fishing industry in the country. So we're going to do 3 charts. Yep, we're back to charts again. The first chart is going to be on Maine. We want to take a look at sort of what's going on that day in the primary. Sort of get an idea whether they're going to be more tending towards one candidate versus the other. We'll then take a look at Janet Mills' transits, and then we'll look at Graham Platner's transits. And then I'll give you sort of an idea of where I think this is going to head. Okay, so first, let's take a look at the main chart. And I want to point out a few other things, which are what transits are now will be affecting Maine on that date of the primary. First thing we see here is Mercury. Mercury is going to be squaring the natal Mercury in the Maine chart. So what is that indicating? People are not hearing what they want to hear. It can also be, when we look at the state chart for Maine, it can also be that it's primarily younger voters. Sometimes Mercury is associated with the younger generations. So it could be that these voters are not hearing what they want to hear. But I think overall, in general, I think it's going to be something that is prevalent across all the voters, not just the younger generation, but they may be more in tune with what they're thinking. So that's a problem for both candidates. So in effect, neither one is probably going to be hitting all the right notes. Now, what we also see here is we see Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter, optimism, opportunities. Venus is the voters, social type of things, social settings. And this is actually trine with Pluto and Sun in the natal chart of Maine. Now, Pluto and Sun conjunct in the natal chart is a pretty significant position. And these people are very comfortable. They feel like they're in control of their lives. They don't want someone else coming in to tell them how to do things. So they're pretty, they're on top of their own lives. And I think that's important to them. And seeing that we've got Jupiter and Venus coming up, this is something that's going to also be important in this race. Who is going to give Maine people what they want without providing too much of things that they don't want, but providing what they need in their lives? The last one we have is Neptune. Neptune is actually making a conjunction to both Saturn and the North Node. This is a little difficult in that it's hard to read conjunctions sometimes, especially with Neptune. Neptune tends to fog the issue. So we've got fantasies here. We're not, could be some lies, deception going on. And when it's on Saturn and where we take in, this is, in effect, the voters are not going to have a clear idea of what either one of these candidates will be bringing to. And Saturn is sometimes thought of as being the structure of the government, into their structure of the government. What would they provide? So that's sort of the whole thing that we're looking at. Let's take a look at how each individual client is now going to fit into that. So let's take a look at Janet Mills' chart. And I'm not looking at every single transit that is affecting every one of our planets. I'm only looking at transits to planets that have angles to the main chart. In her case, the only planet she has that has a transit that also has an angle to the main chart is Mercury. So Mercury is actually hitting her sun, and that sun then in turn is hitting the main Mercury. So what is this saying? Well, first off, let's take the Mercury and the sun, and that's in the main chart with her chart. So her identity is not really in line with what people from Maine are thinking. It can also be the younger generation in Maine. So that's not very positive. It also brings out the fact that she is going to be 78 years old. And that, for a younger generation, could indicate that we need someone younger. And this is not to say she can't do the job. It's to say that there's more likelihood of things happening down the line. Now we have Mercury as a transit affecting her sun. So when she's campaigning, she's not going to be alleviating any of the fears or the questions that people have. So this is still going to be sort of something that people are conflicted about. They're going to be asking questions about that, and there's no way that she's going to be able to mollify that. She's not going to be able to say, well, it's going to be fine. Or this is, I'm doing well now, I'm energetic and everything else. This comes down to what voters actually feel about this. So there's very little way that she can change people's minds on this if they're already engaged in a particular stance. So now, let's go on to the last one, and that's Graham Platner. Yep, he's got a lot going on in his chart, and I didn't even cover all the angles because there's just so much going on here. And again, I'm only covering angles, in effect, transits that are hitting his planets that actually have connections to planets in the main chart. So first, let's take a look at his transiting Mercury. Transiting Mercury is hitting as a trine, which is a good angle, his Saturn. So he's probably got some, good ideas on governing. He can probably get very focused. He can probably get things accomplished, which is really good. Problem is that that Saturn is in conjunct to the Mercury in the main chart. So again, we've got people from Maine that are going to say, okay, I don't know if you can actually govern. I don't know if you can take these positions of responsibility. I don't know, in effect, if you can get there from here. So that's something he needs to prove to people, but he's got a trine here, so he can do that. So he can try and turn that around so he can, in effect, take away a lot of that negative feeding into this. So now let's take a look at the next thing Mercury is impacting, and that is his Mars and Uranus. As I mentioned before, Mars and Uranus is a tough one here. That Mars and Uranus conjunct actually causes explosive type outbursts. You don't think before you act. So this is, and if we look here, this is an inconjunct. We can't get there from here, meaning he's not thinking about his actions, which that's a tough one to come back on. But this is also fine if we look at this to Mercury in the main chart. So even though that's an issue, which could be an explosive temper, just not thinking, I think people from Maine actually think he could control this better. So I think if he can show them that he can control this anger, control his acting before thinking, he would have a good shot here. So that's not bad. So now let's take a look at Jupiter and Venus, which is transits. It is coming up as an inconjunct, and that is to his Neptune. Okay. Promising too much. Over-promising and can't deliver. So this is people may start to realize that he's got a vision, but you just can't get there from where he is. So he's just putting too much into this, saying everything, he sees, and it's just too much. So what happens with this Neptune in the Maine chart? Well, Neptune is coming up, and it's actually square to both Sun and Pluto. Sun and Pluto is the identity of Maine. And in this case, they're not going to, it's a square, so he could actually still work this out, but it's a lot of work. They're not going to take too much to someone that is giving them, in effect, promises that he knows he can't meet. So he needs to really come back on his rhetoric, on what he's saying, because I think that people in Maine are going to be able to see through a lot of this. And if he can't do that, they may go with someone else. Now, we also have, let's come over to another one here. We've got Neptune. Neptune, transiting Neptune, is hitting his Jupiter. So this is, again, the fogginess on Jupiter, his vision, his opportunities. And we've got this as being a square. So again, he can work this, but it's difficult. He needs to know that there's a problem here. Now, this is actually trine to North Node and Saturn in the Maine chart. So they can actually see some of what he's saying makes a lot of sense to the people, but not everything. And that's where the issue is. He's not being selective in what he has as a vision. And it could be things, and I don't know all his policy pieces, but it could be maybe that the people in Maine are not really interested in having health insurance for everyone. Maybe they want to have things like SNAP instead, or specific type of opportunities. And I think maybe Platner could do that. But I think he's trying to give too much to everyone and losing a lot of people. But unlike with Mills, she has very little there. Platner has a lot going on. When you have a lot going on, you tend to adjust. And he's got the inconjuncts, so he can adjust what he's saying. He can look and say, okay, this is not working. And it's not working because I don't believe I can do this. And say, what can I actually do? So he's got the ability to actually change a lot of what he's doing now. He can control what he's acting on. He can make sure people understand that, yes, at that point, I didn't realize that I had a tendency to act before thinking. I will not do that anymore. So he can come back on a lot of these things that I'm saying and make the people of Maine feel comfortable with him moving forward. Again, Janet Mills, she's got a tough time in getting the younger vote. And I think people are just not seeing that, she's going to be the best candidate. And a lot of that, unfortunately, has to do with age. Even though she could do the job today, there's never a guarantee with tomorrow. But, truthfully, there's never a guarantee with Platner either. But age is different, especially with what's been happening lately with some of the representatives and people in Congress. So overall, I think Platner has a better shot. So I think at this point, unless something changes, he does have stuff coming up in February, which we'll look at, and I'll identify whether it's changed anything about the way I feel, about what I'm seeing, and the interpretation on that. But I think at this point, I'm looking for Platner to move ahead here and to pick up the Democratic, become the Democratic candidate against Collins in Maine, and that's going to be in June. Thank you for listening and have a great day. Bye now.